Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Easy English Spark, your cozy home for mastering English listening and speaking skills. In today's video, we'll take you on a quick and exciting journey through our brand new 10-chapter story. Starting from Chapter 1, The End of Exams, all the way to Chapter 10, New Beginnings. Get ready to boost your comprehension, sharpen your pronunciation, and build your confidence step by step. Let's dive in and spark your English journey together. Chapter 1, The End of Exams. Evan Cole sighed deeply as he set down his portfolio case. The last of his artwork had been examined, critiqued, and, thankfully, approved by Professor Hartley. A gentle nod and a simple, "Well done, Evan," were all the confirmation he needed. After 4 grueling years of deadlines, critiques, and late-night painting sessions, his final review was over. University was behind him at last. He stepped out of the studio building into the warm glow of the late afternoon sun. The campus quad, usually buzzing with students rushing between classes, was now quiet. A few underclassmen lounged on the grass, listening to music through earbuds, while the older faces he recognized drifted away toward graduation ceremonies. Evan smiled at the sound of distant applause. Somewhere in the main hall, cheers and hats being thrown marked the culmination of someone else's journey, perhaps his friends. But his own path felt just as momentous. Across the quad, the old clock tower chimed 5 times. Evan rubbed his tired shoulders, feeling the weight of years of hard work slipping away. For a moment, he closed his eyes and let the gentle breeze wash over him, carrying the scent of freshly cut grass and the faint tang of paint thinner from the studio. His stomach rumbled. He realized he hadn't eaten since early morning, too consumed by final touches on his watercolor series. He reached into his pocket and found a small, worn ticket, a gift from his aunt, good for a free ice cream cone at the campus cafe. With a grin, he headed toward the building, only to notice a flock of sparrows darting across the sky. Their carefree flight reminded him of simpler times, childhood summers spent chasing butterflies in his grandmother's garden. He paused, letting himself drift back to that memory, the warm sun on his face, the laughter echoing among rose bushes. Shaking himself free from nostalgia, Evan decided to skip the cafe. He didn't need ice cream right now. He needed fresh air, space to breathe, and a moment to reflect. He thought of Moonlight Lake, a quiet body of water just beyond the edge of town, famous for its still surface that mirrored the sky. The idea of standing at its shore, painting at sunrise, had always inspired him more than any lecture hall ever could. Without another thought, he strode off campus, following the narrow path that led past neat rows of townhouses and into the rolling fields beyond. Tall grasses brushed against his ankles. Dragonflies skimmed the air in flashes of blue and green. He felt lighter with every step, as if the burdens of exams, critiques, and expectations were peeling away. By the time he reached the edge of the Yain woods, the sun had dipped lower, painting the horizon in strokes of pink and gold. The trees parting revealed the first glimpse of Moonlight Lake, a glassy expanse reflecting the pastel sky. A few ducks glided silently across its surface, leaving gentle ripples in their wake. Evan paused at the water's edge and inhaled deeply. The air smelled of damp earth and wildflowers. He took a handful of pebbles and tossed them, watching the concentric rings spread outward until they almost vanished. He settled on a flat stone, drew his knees up, and leaned forward, his sketchbook resting on his lap. For the first time in months, he didn't think about deadlines or grades. Instead, he let his gaze wander across the shimmering water, up to the trembling reeds along the shore, and toward the distant silhouette of the town's clock tower, its bells now silent. In that moment, Evan felt a surge of possibility welling up inside him. The world beyond university was uncharted territory, but it was his to explore. As twilight settled in, a gentle wind rippled the lake's surface, transforming the reflected clouds into shifting brushstrokes of lavender and rose. Evan closed his eyes and allowed himself to dream. Vivid canvases filled with color, stories told through paint, and perhaps one day, his name on the walls of a gallery. He could almost taste the freedom that awaited him, the freedom to create entirely on his own terms. Finally, he opened his sketchbook and began to draw, each line a promise to himself, to rest now, to celebrate this victory, and tomorrow, to begin the real work of becoming the artist he had always wanted to be. The evening settled in around him, and Evan Cole, at peace with his past and excited for his future, watched the first stars appear above Moonlight Lake. Chapter 2. A Chance Meeting. That evening, as the last streaks of sunset faded behind the rolling hills, Evan found himself lingering at the edge of Moonlight Lake. The air was cool now, touched with the faint scent of damp earth and wild mint. Mist curled across the surface of the water in pale wisps, and the reeds at the shoreline swayed gently, their fine tips catching what little light remained. He lifted his sketchbook to record the scene, each curve of the mist, every ripple, shimmering in silver. But before his pencil could meet the page, something else drew his attention. A soft scrape of charcoal on paper carried across the stillness. Evan looked up and saw her, a lone figure seated on a smooth boulder, poised with graceful concentration. She wore a flowing lavender dress that billowed around her like a bloom, the fabric catching the dusky breeze. Her hair was auburn, tumbling, in loose waves to her shoulders, and the moonlight gave it a subtle glow. In her hand, she held a slender stick of charcoal, and with measured strokes, she traced the silhouette of the reeds against the water. Evan stood, reluctant to break the quiet magic of the moment, but curiosity won out. He approached along a narrow path of flattened grass, careful not to startle her. The woman did not look up until he was nearly beside her. When she finally lifted her head, her eyes, large, warm, and the color of polished amber, met his. For an instant, the world seemed to hold its breath. "Good evening," Evan said gently, clearing his throat. "I didn't mean to intrude. Your drawing looked beautiful." She smiled then, a slow, shy curve of her lips that sent a flutter through his chest. "Thank you," she replied, her voice soft as the rustle of leaves. "I didn't realize anyone else came here at this hour." "I come often," he answered, lifting his sketchbook so she could see. "I find inspiration here after exams. I'm Evan," he added, extending a hand. She took it, her fingers surprisingly cool. "Clara," she said. "Clara Montgomery." They both settled on the same boulder, side by side, as the sky above deepened to indigo and the first stars began to appear. Clara placed her sketchbook on her lap, revealing a delicate rendering of the reeds and their reflections, each stroke graceful and precise. Evan traced the lines with his eyes. "Your work is incredible," he said. "I've never seen anybody capture moonlight like that." Clara shrugged lightly. "I've always loved drawing at night. Shapes feel different when the world is hushed." "How about you? I saw your sketchbook earlier. Watercolors?" Evan nodded, excited by her interest. "Yes. I've been experimenting with watercolor washes to capture the way the mist drifts across the lake. But I haven't quite gotten it right yet." He paused, studying her face in the half-light. "What brought you here tonight?" She glanced out at the water. "I needed a quiet place to think. My family's estate has been overwhelming lately. I escape here when the night is calm." Her gaze returned to Evan, curious. "Are you from around here?" "I grew up in a cottage on the far side of town," he explained. "My aunt and I moved there after my father passed. Art has been my world ever since." And you? Clara sighed, a hint of something, loneliness perhaps, or longing, shadowing her expression. I'm supposed to inherit my mother's old manor, but I don't feel at home there. It's full of expectations. Here, I can just be myself. They fell silent then, listening to the gentle lapping of water against the stones. A single firefly drifted between them, its pale glow pulsing like a heartbeat. Evan realized he had forgotten how cold his fingers were until Clara pressed him a small woolen scarf, her own, from her satchel. Here, she said softly. You looked chilly. He wrapped it around his neck, meeting her eyes gratefully. Thank you, Clara. You've already been so kind. Ahead of them, the moon rose in full brilliance, spilling silver onto the lake's surface. In that luminous glow, Evan and Clara sat together, two strangers bound by shared solitude and the quiet magic of the night. They spoke little after that, content to watch shadows shift and stars emerge one by one. When at last the air grew too cool and the mist thickened, Clara closed her sketchbook and stood. I should head back, she murmured. Thank you, Evan, for the company. Evan rose too, heart pounding. Will I see you again? She paused on the path, turning back to him with a gentle nod. Same time tomorrow? He smiled, feeling a warmth that had nothing to do with scarves or summer days. I'll be here. As Clara disappeared into the gathering darkness, Evan remained at the lake shore, watching the place where her lavender dress had faded from view. He breathed in the night air deeply, aware that a chance meeting had changed the shape of his world forever. Chapter 3. Unexpected Connection. Evan returned to Moonlight Lake the very next evening, anticipation fluttering in his chest like a captive bird. As he rounded the bend in the path, he saw Clara already there, seated on the same smooth boulder where they'd met. The pale dusk light caught the contours of her profile, and she looked up with a smile that warmed him from the inside out. He settled beside her, closing the distance between two hearts newly awakened. You're early, he said, voice low so as not to break the hush of settling night. I wanted time to finish this, Clara replied, lifting a small watercolor pad. She turned it so Evan could see, a delicate painting of the lake at twilight. The reeds brushed in soft purples and silvery blues, fireflies flickering like distant lanterns. I tried to capture the magic of this place. Evan examined it closely. It's incredible, he said. You see color in moonlight that I'd never imagined. He reached into his satchel and produced his own sketchbook. I worked on something too. He opened to a charcoal portrait of Clara's face, her hair glowing like embers in the paper's grayscale, her eyes rendered with gentle precision. Clara's breath caught. "Evan, it's beautiful." She placed a hand on his arm, stilling the slight tremor in his fingers. In that small touch, something shifted, an unspoken acknowledgement that this meeting was more than coincidence. They talked then of ordinary things. The crinkle of autumn leaves underfoot, the distant hum of crickets, but every sentence carried the weight of discovery. Clara described her childhood summers spent painting wildflowers in her mother's rose garden. Evan shared memories of midnight sketching sessions under the attic skylight of his aunt's cottage. Ancienne. "No," Clara said, her eyes shining. "I've always wanted to illustrate children's books, worlds filled with talking animals, adventures that begin with a single brave step." Evan smiled broadly. "That's exactly what I want to tell stories in my art. Every canvas a new chapter." He paused, searching her face. "What if we did it together? I could paint the landscapes, you the characters." Her eyes lit up at the suggestion, and for a moment the quiet lake seemed to hold its breath. "I'd love that," she whispered. Night deepened around them. The reeds bowed toward the water as a gentle breeze carried their whispers. Evan took a breath and asked, "Do you ever feel torn between what others expect and what you truly want?" Clara looked away, tracing a finger along the edge of her watercolor pad. "All the time. My mother wants me to marry well, maintain our family name, but I'd rather marry my dreams to someone who understands them." She met his gaze steadily. "Like you do." His heart hammered as he realized how rare it was to find someone who not only saw his own hopes, but cherished them. He reached out and gently covered her hand with his. "I promise you," he said, voice earnest, "I'll always believe in you." They spent hours at the water's edge, sharing laughter and quiet confidences. Clara confessed her fear of failing, her mother's expectations, and Evan admitted his own doubts about never quite being good enough, about the meager savings in his pocket. Yet, every time vulnerability surfaced, the other met it with understanding, weaving their hopes into a fragile tapestry of trust. When the moon climbed high and the lake shimmered in silver light, they fell into a companionable silence. Evan closed his eyes and listened. The soft lap of water, the rustle of reeds, Clara's steady breathing at his side. In that moment, nothing else mattered. No exams passed, no family obligations looming. only the bond forming between two souls who dared to dream together. Finally, Clara rose and brushed off her dress. "I should go," she said gently. Evan stood too, reluctant to break the spell. "Tomorrow?" he asked. She nodded, her smile radiant in the moonlight. "Same place, same time." As she slipped away down the shadowed path, Evan watched her until she dissolved into the night. Then he turned to the water, heart full. The reeds whispered promises he had only begun to understand, and the lake reflected back an uncharted future he could no longer imagine facing alone. Chapter 3 had closed on their chance meeting and opened, wide and bright, on the unexpected connection that would change them both forever. Chapter 4. First Sparks. Over the next week, Evan and Clara's evening meetings became the highlight of each day. As the sun dipped low in the sky, painting the clouds in streaks of rose and gold, Evan would hurry from his aunt's cottage, his sketchbook tucked under one arm, a small jar of charcoal and pastels in his satchel, and head straight for the willow tree at the water's edge. There, Clara awaited him atop their smooth stone bench, always dressed in something that caught the fading light. A pale yellow sundress one night, a soft seafoam green tunic the next, each outfit as effortless and luminous as her laughter. They fell into comfortable rhythm. Evan would open his sketchbook and begin a quick charcoal study of the way Clara's hair caught the breeze, while Clara pulled out her watercolor set and layered translucent washes of color onto heavy paper. Sometimes he sketched her silhouette against the reeds. Sometimes she painted his profile as he leaned forward, brow furrowed in concentration. Their art supplies lay between them like a bridge, brushes and pencils passing back and forth as easily as their words. One evening, Clara surprised him. She had brought 2 small canvases, one blank, one already brushed with a pale wash of lavender. "I thought we could paint side by side," she said, offering him a slender brush. Evan's heart fluttered at the invitation. Under her guidance, he laid out a simple sky gradient in soft pinks and purples, while Clara traced the delicate outlines of dragonflies dancing above the water. Together, they blended their styles, his bold strokes and her feather-light touches, into a single harmonious scene. Between brushstrokes and charcoal lines, they shared more than just art. Clara told Evan about her childhood bedroom, filled with stacks of old storybooks and a battered wooden easel where she'd first learned to paint. Evan confessed that his earliest memories of drawing took place in the attic, where slanted light streamed through the skylight each morning. They laughed at how different their upbringings were. her world of grand estates and manicured gardens, his of humble rooms and thrift shop finds, but discovered how similar their hearts felt, restless, creative, hungry for beauty. One twilight, as Evan cleaned his brushes, Clara leaned closer and whispered, "You've changed the way I see this place." She gestured to the lake, its surface now a deep indigo strewn with firefly lights. Before, it was just water and reeds, but through your eyes I see poems in those ripples. Evan's chest tightened. He realized that for the first time, someone had not only appreciated his art, they'd valued his very vision of the world. He reached across their shared palette and gently took her hand. The warmth of her skin against his was like a promise. "I've never felt more inspired," he said simply. Clara's smile in the waning light was all the answer he needed. They sat hand in hand, watching as the last sliver of sun slipped below the horizon and the air cooled around them. Slowly, as dusk turned to night, Evan stood and offered Clara his arm. She placed her hand on his forearm, and together they walked a few steps along the water's edge. Neither spoke. Words felt unnecessary. The quiet thrumming of crickets and the soft lap of water against stones filled the space between them. In that gentle silence, a spark ignited, one neither art nor language could fully capture, but both could honor in color and line. When at last Clara stood before her own cottage path, she turned to Evan with a breathless smile. "Thank you," she said, "for everything." He brushed a stray lock of hair from her face and nodded, voice thick with sincerity. "Thank you for sharing your world with me." As she slipped inside and closed the door behind her, Evan remained by the lake shore, the memory of her smile glowing brighter than any sunset. He knew then that their connection had deepened into something powerful and real, a spark that would guide them into whatever came next. Chapter 5. A Mother's Ultimatum. The very next evening, Evan hurried down the narrow path to Moonlight Lake, full of hope that Clara would greet him as she had each night before. He found her instead in shadow, sitting on their usual stone bench, with her shoulders drawn inward and her gaze fixed on the rippling water. The pale lanterns of fireflies hovered between them, but Clara's usual warmth was gone. "Clara?" he ventured, voice low. She looked up, her eyes rimmed with worry. For a moment she said nothing, then closed her sketchbook with a trembling hand. "Evan, I have to tell you something." He sat beside her, heart pounding. "What is it?" She took a trembling breath and began in a whisper. "My mother. She's arranged a marriage for me to Charles Whitmore. He's the only son of the Harrington estate. She summoned me to the manor tonight. Her voice cracked. She gave me a choice. I must accept his proposal or be disinherited, cast out from everything I've ever known. Evan's chest tightened. But what about us? Clara shook her head, tears glistening in the lantern light. I don't know. I tried to refuse, but her words cut deeper than any blade. She laid a hand on the water's surface, disturbing the firefly reflections. She said love is a luxury I can't afford. Later that night, long after Clara returned home, Evan could not sleep. His thoughts raced until he crept out of his aunt's cottage under a sky blanketed with stars. He climbed the hill toward Montgomery Manor, determined to witness this ultimatum with his own eyes. The carriage house gates stood ajar, and Evan slipped through, scaling the low stone wall until he crouched behind a thicket of boxwood. Through an arched window of the grand drawing room, he saw Mrs. Montgomery standing by the hearth. The room was bathed in golden lamplight, pristine marble floors, silk draperies, and the perfume of jasmine lingering in the air. Clara stood before her mother, small and pale in a simple white dress that contrasted sharply with the opulent surroundings. Mrs. Montgomery's posture was rigid, her back straight as a column, her face set in a mask of cold determination. You have two choices, Clara. Her voice rang clear, each word deliberate. You will become Mrs. Whitmore before the 1st of next month, or you will relinquish your claim to this house, your fortune, and your place in my family. Clara's lips trembled. Mother, please. My heart. Your heart is irrelevant, Mrs. Montgomery interrupted, stepping forward so that her jeweled hands glinted against the firelight. Charles Whitmore is everything a Montgomery daughter requires. Title, wealth, influence. You will not jeopardize your future on the whims of an artist with no lineage and no prospects. Tears welled in Clara's eyes. She pressed her palms together as if in prayer. But I love Evan. Mrs. Montgomery's laugh was brittle. Love? You are young and foolish. You know nothing of duty. If you insist on shirking your responsibilities, then you shall have neither love nor legacy. She swept an arm toward the door. Decide by dawn, Clara. After that, you are on your own. With that, she turned away to inspect a silver candelabra, leaving Clara standing alone in the flickering light. Clara bowed her head, shoulders shaking as she absorbed the weight of her mother's decree. Dawn broke with a cold clarity. Clara slipped from the manor under a sky washed pale with early light. Evan waited near the wrought iron gate, his sketchbook clutched in one hand. She emerged, her face drawn. "I said yes," she whispered, voice hollow. Evan reached for her, but she flinched. "I had no other choice." He drew her into his arms, holding her as though they might both shatter under the morning sun. "I'm so sorry," he murmured, brushing tears from her cheek. "I won't give up on you." Clara trembled in his embrace. "I don't know what tomorrow brings," she said, "but right now, I feel lost." As the first beams of sunlight gilded the manor's turrets, Evan pressed a gentle kiss to her forehead. "We'll face it together," he promised. And in that fragile moment, though the future seemed as uncertain as mist on the lake, their love stood firm against the harshest of ultimatums. Chapter 6. Heartbreak and Resolve. Dawn's pale light struck Evan's attic window hours before he was ready to face it. Despite the early hour, he lay motionless on his narrow cot, staring at the slanted ceiling as memories of Clara's tears and his own helpless promises played through his mind. The studio where he once found solace now felt emptier than ever. Each brushstroke he had imagined in the days after her departure dissolved into doubt. Every charcoal line seemed to mock him with its uncertainty. After what felt like an eternity, Evan dragged himself from the attic and shuffled downstairs to Aunt Rose's kitchen. The scent of freshly baked bread and simmering tea should have brought comfort, but he pushed his plate of toast aside and drifted to the hearth, where the embers still glowed softly. Aunt Rose watched him with gentle concern. She didn't ask questions, she never pried, but her steady presence was the only thing keeping him anchored to any sense of normalcy. For several days, Evan scarcely left the cottage. Instead of sketching by Moonlight Lake, he wandered its banks without pencil or paper, tracing Clara's footprints in his mind. He visited the boulder where they first met, closed his eyes, and whispered apologies to the empty air. Each evening he returned to the cottage with hollow steps, unable even to pick up a brush. His aunt worried. His meals lay untouched. His usual quiet humming of melodies at the piano was gone, and the flame in his eyes had dimmed. One afternoon, Aunt Rose slipped a neatly folded newspaper beside his teacup. Without a word, she placed it gently before him and left the room, her soft footsteps receding down the hall. Evan's gaze fell upon a bold headline in the Arts and Culture section: "Call for Young Artists, National Exhibition Competition, $1,000 Grand Prize and Solo Gallery Showcase." Below, the details were clear. Entries due by the end of the month, any medium accepted, Submission limited to one work no larger than 30 inches in any dimension. As he read the words, something flickered inside him. A spark of the ambition that had first driven him to pick up a pencil as a child. He folded back the page to read the prize breakdown and rules. The winner would not only receive a cash award substantial enough to cover his modest living expenses for months, but also a solo exhibition in the city's most prestigious gallery. Evan slid the newspaper across the table. "I can't do it," he whispered, though even to his own ears the words sounded weak. Aunt Rose sat beside him and placed her hand over his. "What if this is your chance?" she said quietly. "To turn your heartbreak into something beautiful." That evening, Evan climbed the creaking stairs to his makeshift studio and cleared the old drafts from his work table. He lit a single lamp, its warm glow carving a pool of gold in the gathering dusk. With trembling fingers, he opened a fresh canvas and allowed the bristles of his brush to kiss its surface with washes of cerulean and gray, colors that reminded him of Lake Moonlight's mist. He worked late into the night, sketching Willow's reeds arcing against the water and a solitary figure standing at the shore. Each line carried the weight of his sorrow, every hue reflecting his longing. Over the next days, Evan poured himself into the painting with a single-minded determination he hadn't known since before Clara's ultimatum. He experimented relentlessly, adding layers of impasto to capture the texture of the reeds, glazing translucent pigments to evoke the lake's mirrored sky, and sketching faint silhouettes of two figures, one poised to walk away, the other left behind. At times, frustration threatened to overwhelm him. He crumpled discarded sketches and hurled brushes across the studio in moments of bitter defeat. But each morning, the painting on his easel beckoned him back, demanding to be finished. Aunt Rose brought him tea and sandwiches at irregular intervals, offering wordless companionship that kept him from surrendering entirely. She gathered discarded rags and wiped his tears without a hint of scorn. On nights when he nearly dozed at his stool, she stoked the embers in the hearth and whispered, "You're doing this for yourself." Finally, with just days to spare, Evan placed the last strokes on his canvas. He stepped back and let the silence wash over him. There, on the surface of the painting, was Moonlight Lake at its most haunting hour. Mist curling like spectral dancers, reeds whispering secrets. In shadow and beside the water's edge, a lone figure gazing out, resolute and unbowed. In that final image, he saw not only his heartbreak, but also his unwavering resolve to transform pain into something enduring. Evan cleaned his brushes by lamplight, his hands stained with deep blues and silvers. He rolled the canvas gently and wrapped it in burlap for submission. As he sealed the envelope addressed to the gallery committee, his heart swelled with a new feeling: hope. The contest now offered him more than a prize. It was an opportunity to prove, first to himself and then to the world, that heartbreak could be a wellspring of creativity, and that resolve forged in sorrow was stronger than any obstacle. Twa Tarwine. The submission dropped in the mailbox at dawn. Evan returned to the cottage, where Aunt Rose awaited him, eyes shining with quiet pride. He laid the package before her. "It's done," he said, voice steady. In that moment, the ache inside him began to transform into something he could carry forward. An indomitable belief that even the deepest wounds could give birth to art that speaks to the human soul. Chapter 6 had ended in heartbreak, but it had also set the stage for the triumph that awaited him at dawn. Chapter 7. Triumph at Dawn. Evan awoke before sunrise, his heart still fluttering with the restless energy of the previous night's work. He sat on the edge of his narrow cot in the attic studio, sunlight just beginning to seep through the small skylight, painting the walls in pale gold. Today was the day he would learn his fate in the National Young Artists Competition, and the memory of every brushstroke he'd laid on the canvas rushed through his mind like a river of hope and fear. He dressed quickly, pulling on his worn jacket and straightening the collar of his shirt as if preparing for a ceremony. In the kitchen below, Aunt Rose hummed softly while arranging a simple breakfast of porridge and tea. She caught his eye in the doorway and offered a small, encouraging smile. Evan returned it, trying to steady his voice when he spoke. "I'm going to mail the letter today," he said, though by then the envelope with his painting's title, Moonlight Resolve, had already been sealed and dropped in the gallery's postbox 3 days earlier. Today, he expected the winner's notification. After breakfast, he paced the cottage garden, glancing at the mailbox half a dozen times. Each peal of the morning mail cart's wheels sent his pulse racing. He recalled the earlier days of heartbreak, Clara's tears, the ultimatum, the lonely nights by the lake, and felt a fierce determination knot in his chest. If he could turn his sorrow into art that spoke to strangers, perhaps he could turn his life around as well. At 10 o'clock sharp, the postman appeared at the gate carrying a single ivory envelope embossed with the gallery's seal. Evan's breath caught in his throat. He took the envelope with trembling hands and retreated to Aunt Rose's kitchen table, where the morning sun slanted through the window, illuminating the paper like a spotlight. He tore it open slowly, sliding out. A folded letter. His eyes darted across the first lines. Dear Mr. Cole, it is my great pleasure to inform you that your submission, Moonlight Resolve, has been selected as the grand prize winner of the National Young Artists Exhibition. We would be honored to host a solo presentation of your work in our main gallery next month, and to award you the prize sum of $1,000 in recognition of your exceptional talent. Evan's hand flew to his mouth to stifle a cry of joy. Tears pricked at the corners of his eyes. He read the lines again, slower this time, as though tasting each word for the first time. Grand prize. Solo presentation. Exceptional talent. All the hours of anguished painting, the countless rinses of brush and wash of pigment, had culminated in this moment. He looked up at Aunt Rose, who had been watching him with a tender expression. I've won, he whispered, voice thick. I've really won. Aunt Rose reached across the table to clasp his hand. I knew you could do it, she said. I always believed in you. Evan stood abruptly and began to pace, the letter clenched in one hand. He felt light, weightless, as though the loss of Clara's love had been transformed into wings. He dashed to his studio, flipping on the lamp and gathering his brushes. With a laugh that caught in his throat, he dipped into his palette and made a single, bold stroke of cobalt blue across a fresh sheet of watercolor paper, a spontaneous celebration of triumph. Word spread quickly through the little cottage. Neighbors peeked in through the windows. Aunt Rose's friends called blessings through the front door, and by noon, a small gathering had formed. Evan stepped outside onto the porch, raising the letter high above his head like a trophy. He shouted, I won! I won the grand prize! And did a clumsy victory dance that had everyone clapping and cheering. That afternoon, he walked into town with the letter tucked safely in his pocket. The familiar streets seemed to shimmer with new light. The bakery's golden loaves, the florist's riot of peonies, even the weathered bench by the post office, all felt imbued with celebration. Passers-by offered congratulations, and Evan greeted them with a grin he could hardly contain. As evening approached, Aunt Rose cooked a special meal of roasted vegetables and fresh-baked bread. They set the table with the few candles they owned, and Evan placed the envelope beside his plate like a precious keepsake. Over dinner, they spoke of what the prize could mean: new art supplies, the chance to rent a small studio in the city, maybe even the funds to visit that coastal village. He'd always dreamed of painting, yet beneath his euphoria, a single question flickered like a shadow. What will Clara think when she sees this? He imagined her standing by the lake again, brush in hand, surprise and admiration in her amber eyes. He wondered if these triumphs would bridge the gap between their worlds, her world of expectation and privilege, and his world of humble passion. That night, as the candles guttered and the moon climbed high overhead, Evan climbed back to his attic sanctuary. He stood before the window, gazing at the outline of Moonlight Lake in the distance, silvered by moonlight. He folded the gallery's letter neatly into the pocket of his jacket, pressing it close to his heart. "Tomorrow," he whispered to the stillness, "I begin the next chapter." And with that resolve shining brighter than any dawn, Evan Cole drifted into sleep, his dreams filled not with heartbreak, but with possibility, and with the knowledge that his art, born of loss, had now become the very thing that would carry him forward. Chapter 7 had ended in triumph at dawn, and the world awaited what he would create next. Chapter 8. Clara's Return. That evening, the city gallery buzzed with anticipation. Polished floors gleamed under chandelier light, and walls draped in deep charcoal invited eager visitors to contemplate the works on display. Evan stood near the entrance, nervously straightening his tie for the third time. His heart still thrummed from the thrill of seeing Moonlight Resolve, that mist-wreathed canvas born of heartbreak, spotlighted on the gallery's main wall. Invitations had flown out weeks ago. Critics, patrons, friends from town. Even his Aunt Rose had managed to secure a seat VIP enough that she lingered at the edge of the crowd, her proud smile never leaving her face. As the doors opened, well-dressed guests drifted in, murmuring compliments. A gallery manager in a tailored suit guided a patron over to Evan and whispered a few words of praise in his ear. Evan beamed and offered a polite handshake. Across the room, clusters of onlookers admired the subdued blues and silvers of his painting, commenting on the way the reeds seemed almost to sway, how the lone figure at the water's edge carried a palpable sense of resolve. And then, through the gathered throng, he saw her. Clara emerged from the corridors beyond, framed by the gallery's soft uplighting. Gone was the lavender dress of that first night by the lake. In its place, she wore a simple ivory blouse and charcoal trousers, her auburn hair tied back in, a loose braid that showcased the determined set of her cheekbones. In one hand, she held a single white rose, an echo of the wildflowers she once sketched, while her other hand clutched a small portfolio case. For a moment, Evan forgot the applause and the swirling conversations. His world narrowed to the space between them. Clara paused at the edge of the gathering, eyes searching until they found his. She offered a gentle, tentative smile, and in that instant, every doubt that had haunted Evan, every pang from her departure, melted beneath the warm glow of that reunion. Excusing himself from a pair of art collectors, he moved swiftly toward her. "Clara," he breathed, his voice catching. "I didn't expect to see you here." She lowered the portfolio, her expression brightening. "I wouldn't have missed this for anything," she replied, voice soft but steady. She stepped forward and placed the rose in Evan's hand. "Congratulations," she said. "Your painting, it's more beautiful than I imagined. You've captured everything I felt that night." His pulse soared at her words, words that acknowledged not just the painting, but the night they had first shared, and the bond that had grown between them. As they stood before Moonlight Resolve, Clara reached into her portfolio and pulled out a small sketch. Unfolding it, she revealed a delicate drawing of the gallery itself, the polished floors, the chandelier, the painting in its spotlight, and two figures at its center, sketched with the same expressive lines Evan had once reserved only for the eye. Lake's reeds. One figure held a brush, the other held a rose. Clara's eyes glistened as she handed the drawing to him. "I wanted to show you how I see this moment," she said. "Not just your triumph, but ours." Evan traced the lines with reverent fingers. "It's perfect," he whispered. He looked up at her, searching her amber eyes. "I never stopped believing you'd come back." Her gaze fell shyly. "After everything," she admitted, "I was afraid you'd moved on. But when I heard the news that you'd won the competition, that you had your own show, I knew I had to see it for myself. And to tell you, I'm free now. I left everything behind for a different kind of life." He swallowed hard, emotions tumbling together, relief, joy, lingering sorrow for the pain she had endured. "Clara," he said, voice thick, "I'm proud of you. I know now how strong you are." He took both her hands in his. "And I'm sorry for the hurt we both felt. But seeing you here makes me happier than any prize could." A hush fell over the small space as other guests noticed the embrace. A reporter from the city paper, invited to cover Evan's opening, approached with a camera. He snapped a few photos of the reunited pair, capturing Clara's hand resting gently on Evan's arm, Evan's grateful smile, the glow of Moonlight Resolve behind them. "This is the kind of story readers love," the photographer murmured, before melting back into the crowd. For the next hour, Evan and Clara moved together through the exhibit. He introduced her to the gallery manager as his inspiration, She explained to patrons how art had become their shared language. They laughed over their early sketches, confessed new dreams, to collaborate on an illustrated book, to travel and paint distant shores. No longer bound by her mother's demands or his own insecurities, they envisioned a future shaped by mutual respect and the quiet confidence born of overcoming adversity. As the evening wound down and visitors drifted away, the gallery lights dimmed to a soft glow. Evan and Clara lingered in the empty hall, the hush a welcome contrast to the earlier bustle. Clara leaned her head on Evan's shoulder. "Thank you for believing in me," she whispered. He kissed her temple. "Thank you for believing in me." Together they left the gallery under a sky sparkling with stars. In his pocket, Evan still carried the white rose. In her heart, Clara held the knowledge that love, like art, could be reborn through courage and resolve. Chapter 8 had drawn them back together, not as the hopeful dreamers who first met by Moonlight Lake, but as confident partners ready to paint the rest of their story side by side. Chapter 9: Reconciliation. The morning after the gallery opening dawned clear and bright. Evan slipped quietly out of his aunt's cottage before sunrise, carrying a small picnic basket filled with bread, cheese, and fresh fruit. He made his way across the dew-dipped lawn to the sculpture garden behind the city gallery, where marble figures and carved fountains stood like silent sentinels among clipped hedges and flowering shrubs. Today, the garden felt charged with possibility, a place where memory and hope could meet on equal ground. He found Clara already there, seated on a low stone bench beside a circular fountain. She wore a simple blue linen dress that caught the sunlight in soft folds, and her auburn braid rested casually over one shoulder. In her hand she held a sketchbook, but she had closed it and now stared thoughtfully at the water's gentle swirl. Evan paused a few steps away, watching the way her profile caught the morning light, and felt his heart swell with a mixture of joy and tenderness. "Good morning," he said softly, stepping forward with the picnic basket in hand. Clara looked up and offered him a tentative smile. "Good morning, Evan." She stood, smoothing the skirts of her dress. "Thank you for bringing this." She gestured to the basket. "And for inviting me here." He set the basket on the bench and lifted the lid, revealing warm croissants and ribbons of blackberry jam. "I thought we might share a quiet meal. No crowds, no speeches, just us." He poured them each 2 cups of coffee from a thermos and handed her one. Clara accepted it, her fingers brushing his. and he caught the faint scent of lavender on her skin. They sat side by side, sipping coffee in companionable silence as birds flitted among the trees. Around them, the marble sculptures, an angel, with outstretched wings, a youth frozen in mid-stride, a mother cradling her child, seemed to watch over their reunion. Finally, Clara set her cup down and turned to face him fully. "Evan," she began, voice a little unsteady, "I've been thinking about last night. About what I said and what I didn't say." Her amber eyes held both sorrow and resolve. "I never properly apologized for the way I left you, the way I let my fear of my mother's expectations drive me away." She paused, searching his face. "I'm so sorry for the pain I caused you." Evan reached out and took her hand. "Clara, I know you did what you thought you had to do. I felt hurt, yes. But I've also spent these past days understanding why you made that choice. You were trapped by obligation, by pressure that I couldn't begin to imagine." He gave her fingers a gentle squeeze. "I forgive you." Tears glistened at the corners of Clara's eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. "Your forgiveness means more than I can say." She drew in a shaky breath and continued. "But I realize now that forgiveness isn't enough. I need to make things right. By sharing everything with you, my thoughts, my plans, my fears, so that we never end up hiding from one another again." Evan nodded. "I want that too." He leaned forward, picking up a warm croissant. "I've changed as well, Clara. After the contest, after the exhibition, I saw what happens when I pour my heart out in paint. I don't just paint to capture beauty. I paint to heal, to understand my own story. And I realize that I want you in every part of my life, not just in my art." Clara's lips curved into a shy smile. "Then let's start fresh," she said. "No more silences, no more ultimatums. We'll face everything together." He smiled back, his relief and happiness shining in his eyes. "Together," he agreed. They unpacked the rest of the picnic. Slices of creamy cheese, sweet grapes, and crisp apple wedges, sharing bites and laughter. As they ate, Clara talked about her new ideas for illustrating a children's book. Whimsical forests, curious foxes, maps of imaginary worlds. Evan described the landscapes he longed to paint: misty lakes at dawn, weathered barns under stormy skies, the play of light on cobblestone streets. Each spoke in turn, and the other listened intently, as if their dreams were precious relics. After breakfast, they strolled along the gravel paths, pausing before each sculpture. At a marble statue of two dancers caught in mid-twirl, Clara stopped and laid her hand on the cool stone. "Look at how they balance each other," she said. "Their weight is shared perfectly." She glanced at Evan and smiled. "That's how I want us to be." Evan nodded, resting his hand over hers on the statue's base. "Balanced," he said. "Supporting each other through every challenge." In the center of the garden stood a circular reflecting pool, its polished surface undisturbed by wind. They leaned over the edge together, watching the sky and foliage ripple in the water. Clara took a deep breath. "I know my mother still expects things of me, and there will be difficult days ahead, but I want you to be there with me, by my side, whenever I need strength." He turned to her, eyes filled with promise. "And I want you to be there for me, too. When self-doubt creeps in, when I struggle with a painting, I want to know I can lean on you." She smiled, brushing a stray lock of hair behind his ear. "Always." Evan reached into his pocket and pulled out a small leather-bound notebook. His travel journal, blank except for the first page, which read, "Our Adventures Together." He handed it to Clara. "I was thinking, after the gallery, we could travel for a while. Paint and sketch wherever inspiration takes us. We'll fill this book with our story." Clara's eyes lit up and she took the journal gladly. "I'd love that," she said. "A journey together, side by side." They sealed their promise with a gentle kiss, the marble figures around them looking on in silent approval. The morning sun filtered through the leaves in golden shafts, illuminating the garden in a warm, hopeful glow. As they walked back toward the gallery entrance, hands entwined, hearts aligned, they both knew that reconciliation was more than forgiveness. It was a mutual decision to share their lives openly, to support each other's dreams, and to face whatever storms might come as equals. Chapter 9 had brought them back from separation into a partnership forged in honesty, respect, and love, ready to write the next pages of their shared story. Chapter 10: New Beginnings. The first light of dawn crept across the horizon as Evan and Clara made their way down the garden path of the gallery, their hands entwined around the little leather travel journal labeled "Our Adventures Together." Neither spoke. The soft hush of the waking city seemed to applaud their promise. At the edge of the gate, Aunt Rose stood waiting, a small satchel in one hand and a tearful smile on her face. "Be safe," she whispered, gathering Clara in a warm embrace. Then she turned to Evan and pressed a small wooden box into his palm. "For inspiration," she said quietly. Inside lay a set of finely honed brushes, her own favorite tools when she taught Evan to mix his first watercolors years ago. He hugged her, voice thick with gratitude, and slipped them into his satchel beside his paints and sketchbook. With a last wave, the two of them set off into the morning light, their footsteps echoing on cobblestones as they headed toward the train station. At Platform 3, the early train to the coastal town of Shorehaven waited with steam drifting from its engine. Clara and Evan found 2 seats by the window, unfolded the journal between them, and began to map out their first destination. Chapter 1: Seaside Sketches. Clara wrote in neat script, and Evan underlined it. They divided up tasks. Clara would illustrate a young heroine, a girl who dreams of exploring the world, while Evan would paint the shifting hues of dawn and dusk over rocky shores. As the train rumbled south, they watched fields of golden wheat and patchwork vineyards slip by. Evan rested his head against Clara's shoulder, the steady rhythm of wheels lulling him into a peaceful reverie. When the conductor called Shorehaven, they shouldered their packs and stepped onto the sun-warmed platform. Salty breezes carried the cry of gulls and the faint clatter of nets being hauled at the distant docks. They set up camp on a windswept bluff overlooking the sea. Clara unpacked her watercolors and began sketching fishermen hauling in their catch, capturing the creased lines of their weathered faces. Evan mixed cerulean and burnt sienna on his palette to mirror the foam-crested waves. Together they worked side by side, occasionally trading brushes so that each could add details in the other's style. Her graceful lines joining his bold strokes, his expressive washes complementing her delicate shading. At midday, they strolled through Shorehaven's labyrinth of narrow lanes. Bright stalls of sun-bleached shells and hand-carved trinkets lined the cobblestones. Clara paused before a stack of brass lanterns. "These would make perfect props in our story," she said, snapping a quick sketch. Evan agreed, and they haggled gently with the stall owner, coming away with 2 small lanterns to illustrate the heroine's voyage by starlight. By sunset, their first spread in the travel journal took shape, a double-page watercolor of the cliffside, against a blazing orange sky, with Clara's heroine investigating the glowing lanterns at her feet. Evan penned a caption in flowing script. She followed the lantern's call, uncertain of what lay beyond the horizon, yet certain she would not walk alone. The next morning they boarded a coastal steamer bound for the mountain town of Pinecrest. As the vessel cut through misty waters, they planned the next chapter of their journey. Chapter 2: Highland Echoes. Clara imagined grand pines whispering secrets to travelers. Evan envisioned sunsets behind jagged peaks. In Pinecrest, they rented a modest wooden cabin perched on stilts above a rushing mountain stream. Clara awoke at dawn to paint the first rays filtering through towering firs, while Evan sketched the old stone bridge that arched over the water. Locals shared steaming, mugs of herbal tea and tales of ancient trails winding through hidden valleys. Clara listened with wide eyes, committing every detail to memory for later illustration. Each evening, after supper by lantern light, they reviewed their work. Clara flipped through her sketchbook, pointing out a scene of a fox stepping gingerly over a moss-covered log. Evan suggested adding moonlit reflections in the stream below. They laughed at how seamlessly their ideas wove together, like two threads in a single tapestry. Over the following weeks, they journeyed onward, to the sun-baked hills of Marigold Valley, where golden poppies swayed in the breeze, to the quiet ruins of an old abbey perched on a cliff above the ocean, and finally to a bustling market town renowned for its night festivals, where paper lanterns drifted skyward like glowing blossoms. In each place, they added pages to Our Adventures Together. Clara's lively character sketches side by side with Evan's sweeping landscapes, bound by handwritten captions and pressed wildflowers tucked into corners. Through rainstorms and sunlit days, through moments of exhaustion and bursts of creative exhilaration, their partnership deepened. Each challenge, finding shelter when the wind howled, repairing a broken watercolor tin, navigating unknown paths, became a shared triumph, proof that they could face anything together. At journey's end, they returned to the city with a travel journal brimming with art and memories. In the studio they shared, walls once bare now displayed their collaborative work. Canvases of moonlit lakes, vibrant festival scenes, and even a miniature diorama of Shorehaven's lantern-lit cove. Clara laid down her brush, turning to Evan with a radiant smile. "This," she said softly, gesturing at the gallery of their travels, "is only the beginning." Evan stepped forward, heart full. To new stories, new horizons, together. He opened the journal to the very last page and wrote in bold letters, "And so their journey continues, one sunrise at a time." They sealed the journal, their hands brushing, as the morning light streamed in through the studio window. No longer were they bound by fears or ultimatums, only by the promise of shared dreams and the open road ahead. Chapter 10 closed on a world reborn for them both, a world where love and art walked hand in hand into every new beginning. Great work today. Every moment you spend practicing brings you closer to mastering your English listening and speaking skills. Remember, progress comes with patience and consistency. If this story inspired you or helped you in your learning journey, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Easy English Spark channel for more lessons and stories. Keep listening, keep speaking, and keep believing in your growth. I'll see you in the next video. Take care and keep shining.